We are in your U.S. history book, Chapter 17, Section 2. Congress rejects Johnson's proposal. Now we're in that Reconstruction area of the South after the Civil War, and we saw the mess that the South was in. And now it is how are we going to unite the United States of America? How are these states going to be able to become states again? And so that is the period of time we're talking between 1865 and 1877. We got to the point that Lincoln was assassinated, and now we have a new president, the vice president, whose name was Andrew Johnson. And he's an unlikely president at this time, mainly because as a Republican, he had a Democrat background. He really was considered more of a Southern Democrat, but he did stand by, keeping the Union together. So he wasn't a secessionist, so to say. So here we have more of a Southern white Democrat being president than is really wanted according to Congress, as we have a lot of abolitionists in Congress, senators that really wanted to support support the prohibition of slavery and such. So we're going to have a clash between Congress and between the president. It'll become more apparent than it was even during the time of Abraham Lincoln. So Congress reconvened on December 1865. Johnson had put his proposal up on how he wanted to quickly bring the southern states back into the Union. So the leaders of the radical Republicans, they wanted to have a harsh program, a harsher or stronger program in the states coming back into the Union, and more regulations. And they did not want to cooperate with President Johnson's proposal, his plan. President Johnson, like I said, was considered a Southern Democrat to them. So, and he also had some personal difficulties, as he lacked political skill. He wasn't the best of speakers, and he had not supported the freeing of slaves in the Emancipation Proclamation in the beginning. And so they thought, does he have an arrogant attitude? Is he racist? Those things came to the mind with him. And he sometimes even appeared like he had been drinking. Whenever he would have a cold or sick, he would would be drinking, and he would speak sometimes. And so they thought, is he a drunk? So there was a lot of difficulties with President Johnson, although he had the heart to bring back those southern states into the Union. Some even thought that he may have been involved in the implementation of Lincoln's assassination. Now that's a conspiracy theory, but let me tell you, we know from Mary Todd Lincoln, who was Abraham Lincoln's wife, that she had found out that Johnson had actually received a card from Booth, prior to the assassination. So she said, what is this about? And still they don't know what it's about. So some people do think that possibly Johnson might have been involved, Andrew Johnson might have been involved in some parts of the conspiracy against Lincoln. So I don't know how far this goes, but no one has really found out what that card that was left was about. Was it just to frame him or what? But anyway, he was probably the worst person to be in charge, worst president to be in charge at the end of the Civil War, because of his attitudes to some of the bills that had been presented, especially on the issues of slavery. But the Republican radicals were not sympathetic to the Southern woes at all. The Republican radicals basically said they need to do these such things. They need to take an oath of allegiance. At least half of them take an oath of allegiance before they come. We're going to let them back into the United States. So Congress wanted to put forth rules and regulations that were stronger. The leaders of the radicals in charge. Well, there was a couple radicals. One's name was Charles Sumner, and he was from Massachusetts. Another, Thaddeus Stevens. He was from Pennsylvania, and you can see the years that they lived, 1811 to 1874 and 1792 to 1868, this time period. So these were the leaders of the radicals in Congress. They believed the Confederate States had seceded from the Union, and bringing them back into the Union will fall under the jurisdiction of Congress, not the president. They said the states are seceded from the Union. To get back, they need to go through Congress. And the president has nothing to do with this. So they devised this harsher program for Reconstruction, and now Congress would try and will take control. Here's a picture of Sumner and Thaddeus Stevens. Here's a picture. They're dressed in Stevens is dressed in boxing gear, like, we're going to box those southern states, make sure that they're toeing the rope, this harsher program, almost like a general would do. The congressional plan. What was Congress's plan? Number one, Congress was unwilling first to seat the new Southern leaders that were elected. So some of the states elected their leaders and sent them to Congress, but Congress would not let them in because they hadn't followed the rules and took the oaths to come in. And so number two, the states in the South had adopted black code laws, limitations on civil rights. So Congress said, no, I see in the South they have different black code laws for the freedmen and are limiting their rights, so they're not going to come in. And number three, President Johnson did not account for these things and ignored them. They felt the president was just ignoring these problems, ignoring these black code laws, ignoring that they were not taking the oath, that they should take the oath to come in. And so the Republican radicals wanted to protect their own interests by protecting the freedmen, guaranteeing the Republican radical Congress. So the Republican radical says, we need to help the freemen. Indeed, they needed to help the freemen. I mean, we have 3.5 million slaves that are set free with limited education and limited ability and limited opportunities. So the Republican radicals had a different look on the way the South should be. Here, of course, is here it's a couple of the radicals here, so in the midst of all this. So we have, this is a dedication of Thaddeus Stevens' statue as he stood as saying, no, you need to do this and this and this before you come back into the Union. So. Well, Congress indeed does take control during this time. The Freedmen's Bureau of 1865 would protect the freedmen's rights, those slaves that had been set free. It would provide food and clothing for the free slaves. And they would also establish schools to prepare freedmen for a normal life. So the Freedmen's Bureau was to help them in a way, get food and clothing for them, those things that they needed, those necessities of life, and also to help establish schools there. And here's some pictures of school, Freedmen's School here. Again, now we have the Freedmen's Bureau, but we also have the Civil Rights Bill. The Civil Rights Bill was to guarantee citizenship to freemen born in the United States. And this Civil Rights Bill would actually go into the 14th Amendment of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The 14th Amendment was put forth on June 1866 to the Bill of Rights, basically saying that the right here is all said. Let's read it. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of the citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. saying now we have citizens of the United States. We have basically these freed slaves now would become citizens and have all the rights of the citizens, and a state had no jurisdiction to hinder the rights of a citizen of the United States. Very important amendment. Right away, Tennessee ratified this and was restored to the Union, and the other states rejected this because they were hoping for a more lenient plan. So now they're like, they have to now ratify the 14th Amendment. Seems like a good thing to do, but they had issues. The Reconstruction Acts. The Reconstruction Acts by Congress in 1867 divided the former Confederacy, except for Tennessee, into 5 military districts with federal military leaders with broad powers. We went over that already. So we have basically 5 districts. Here they divided it in, these districts, and said, now we'll have military powers to make sure that they are not persecuting these freedmen, and to also to eliminate this military rule, they would have to do some specific things. First, they would have to adopt a new state constitution for their state and guarantee the freemen the right to vote. And this would have to be approved by the voters and by Congress. They would also have to adopt the 14th Amendment, and only then could they be readmitted to the Union, to the United States. So these were civil rights. We'll find that actually the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are all civil rights for the freedmen, the freed slaves during this time. And actually the 14th Amendment goes beyond that to the point of any citizen. President Johnson, he's president, and the Tenure of Office Act. This is a crazy thing here. You think, Tenure of Office Act, what in the world? Well, there was a huge political battle between Congress and the president. And President Johnson vetoed practically every bill that Congress put forth. He vetoed the Freedmen's Bill. He vetoed the Civil Rights Bill, and he disregarded the Reconstruction Acts. And then he would even go on as vetoing the amendment. Here it says, Johnson vetoes this, 41 vetoes, including ignoring and pocket vetoes. So he vetoed more acts than any other presidents in the United States combined. So everything the Congress did, he vetoed. So just remember, he was Johnson the vetoer. Veto means he disagreed. He said, no way, no way. So he tried to stop all of the bills, practically all of the bills that came forth from Congress. So each veto then was overridden by Congress. They voted on overriding his vetoes. So they did not like President Johnson. There was a big rift there because he disregarded everything. And there was practically a showdown between President Johnson and these Republican radicals, especially. So now we have this whole fight going on between Congress and the president. So Congress passed a Tenure of Office Act to try to get rid of President Johnson. And basically it said that the president could not dismiss any civil officer that was appointed by consent of the Senate. Well, he already had dismissed the Secretary of War, Edwin M. Stanton, for cooperating with the radicals. So Stanton was dismissed. So they said, he can't do this. He can't do this. It's a tenure of office. Tenure means that Stanton had a period of time that he was assured to be in office, and Johnson can't just let him go. He signed up for this period of time, and he should be in office still. Well, Johnson didn't want him in office. He was the Secretary of War. And so he just said, you're out. And so Congress said, we're going to impeach President Johnson because he cannot do this. There's a tenure of office for this Secretary of State and any of those that had tenure in the cabinet of the United States. Tenure means They just have a period of time that they're given to be there no matter what, and you can't get rid of them. So anyway, President Andrew Johnson's impeachment. Well, let's find out what happened. This is a big thing in history, especially history of the United States, especially in dealing with our government. So the House of Representatives charged the president of wrongdoing. And he was the first president to be impeached, although it did not go all the way through, right? So he wasn't impeached, but he'd be the first that the Congress would want to impeach a president. And there was a big, long list of crimes that they gave to Johnson, as much as they could put in. But none of them had any substance legally at all, except for one, because he had violated the Tenure of Office Act by dismissing his Secretary of War. But the thing is that his Secretary of War had not been picked by Johnson at all. He was President Lincoln's Secretary of War. So Johnson would have a precedent right to actually let him go, because it was under the President Lincoln's jurisdiction that he was brought into office. So here was, basically the rift between now became bigger, and now could they really impeach President Johnson? The long list of crimes did not work, and now the tenure of office, which is it was a technicality of legalism. Could they really impeach him? Well, he was found guilty by the Senate, but in the House of Representatives, it was only one vote short of his conviction. So he was not convicted at all. And President Johnson stayed in office, although he was not popular in any way as the president in his rift against Congress. They would go on. He would still have to be president, and they wanted to get rid of him and that point as impeach him. The southern states readmitted to the Union. Well, we know that the southern states gradually were all remitted back to the Union as their states today, right? Well, anyway, the southern states adopted their constitutions, and they decided to comply with the 14th Amendment, on the amendment that I read on that citizens could not be deprived of their rights. And most of these states were all readmitted by 1868. That's like 3 years. Most of the states were readmitted to the Union. But the military troops were kept for over a decade. The military troops were not let go until 1877. So that's like 10 years longer. So even though some of the states were readmitted, they still had military troops dictating to them in their states. Then came the 15th Amendment, the next amendment, and that would be the right for these freedmen to vote, the right to vote. And so the last states were required to ratify this too. So they had to ratify the 13th, 14th, and 15th, especially the 14th and 15th during this time, amendment to the Constitution. President Johnson vetoed the amendments 14 and 50 as unnecessary and unconstitutional, and that, of course, caused Congress to get upset and pass over his veto. Just remember, he vetoed. And so here's a picture of the veto, and they have him like, who does he think he is, a king? And this picture here is all of these military districts again that you see, and they're still until 1877, the Northern military was in charge, the troops were in charge of keeping the states in order, especially in regard to the amendments, the 14th and 15th Amendment, and the treatment of freedmen, former slaves. The Reconstruction Amendments were the 13th, 14th, and 15th. These are the Civil War amendments, and you need to know these. The 13th Amendment, what did that one do? Why do we have 3 amendments? Let's find out. These were called the Reconstruction Amendments because they were during the Reconstruction after the Civil War. Well, the 13th Amendment, we should know, came from the Emancipation Proclamation, and it was in 1865, actually under President Lincoln. And it permanently abolished slavery from all areas within the jurisdiction of the United States. It was illegal to have slaves. That's the main one, right? No more slavery. Then came the 14th Amendment in 1868, 3 years later, and it played an important role even today, and it gave citizenship to freemen. So not only they were free, but they also had equal citizenship, and declared that that they would not be mistreated in any way because they were freedmen. All citizens would be considered equal, right? And it also declared that the states are forbidden to take citizens' rights, privileges, and property without due process of law. So the 13th Amendment freed them all. The 14th Amendment made sure that they were given citizenship, right? And they were treated as citizen. Also, in the 14th Amendment, there was a clause that deprived certain high Confederate officials of political privileges and declared that states which deprived citizens of rights would have their represented in the House of Representatives reduced. So saying, and if you do this, if you do not follow this this amendment, then you will have your rights taken over and you will not be able to be in the House of Representatives. So that was basically saying the states coming in, they could not deprive a citizen's rights because they were once a slave. Okay? And then on to the 15th Amendment. That's the next amendment. That guaranteed the former slaves the right to vote. So even though they had their citizenship, they first were set free, they had their citizenship. So this 13 is freedom, 14th is citizenship, 15 would be right to vote. There was a lot of people at this time that didn't have a right to vote. So women didn't have a right to vote. That was a big one at this time. So women couldn't vote. Also, you couldn't vote unless you were 21, and now they limit that to 18 now. And also, Native Americans couldn't vote at this time, and the blacks were not permitted to vote. So we have a lot, but the 15th Amendment guaranteed the former slaves now the right to vote. So former slaves, the black people back had the right to vote now. It also forbade states to deny voting privilege to anyone on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Well, we have some people that still cannot vote, but we know the 15th Amendment was basically giving former slaves, for the freedmen, the right to vote. So now, 13th, abolished slavery. 14th gave them citizenship, and 15th gave them the right to vote. So now we're going to go on to the next section, and we're going to go, of course, there's going to be some other issues that had to be dealt with during this Reconstruction period of time. And basically in the clash of what's going on, we'll see what happens, I think. Okay, let's stop there.